That night, the HOA president stood on my lawn. She told me to take it off. My uniform, my honor. The neighbors froze. Some whispered, some filmed. And for the first time since the war, I felt under attack in my own neighborhood. But what happened next? Nobody was ready for it. Welcome to HOA Secrets. My name is Daniel. I'm a homeowner in a quiet little suburb in Texas. I served my country for 20 years. And now I live under the rules of an HOA that thinks they own the streets. This is my story. And it all began with one rule that went too far. That night, the letter was still taped to my front door. The paper shook in the wind, making that dry scratching sound, like it wanted me to read it again, like it wanted to remind me that in this neighborhood, freedom came with fines. I pulled it down, folded it in my hand. It wasn't just a violation notice, it was a warning. Remove your uniform, or face consequences. I laughed at first, the kind of laugh you give when something feels too absurd to be real. But then, I looked around, across the street. Curtains shifted, a shadow ducked back. Neighbors were watching, always watching. I had lived here 5 years, a quiet cul-de-sac in Texas. Manicured lawns, cookie-cutter homes. From the outside, perfect. But perfection has a price, and that price was paid to the HOA board. They fined me once for leaving my trash can visible for 2 hours. They fined my neighbor for planting a rose bush that was the wrong shade of red. Another family had to repaint their front door 3 times because the president, Ms. Carter, said the color wasn't community approved. But this time, it wasn't about paint or plants. It was about my uniform. That uniform had seen sandstorms, bullets, nights without sleep. It carried sweat, blood, and memories of brothers who never came home. It wasn't decoration. It wasn't fashion. It was my story stitched into fabric, and they wanted me to strip it away. The next morning, I walked out in full uniform. The sun hit the metals, and for a second, I felt pride again. But the pride didn't last, because standing at the end of my driveway, clipboard in hand, was Ms. Carter. She smiled, but her eyes never did. "Daniel," she said, "we've discussed this. You're in violation again." Her voice was sharp, like she was cutting through air. I didn't answer, I just looked at her. Then at the neighbors gathering on their lawns, she continued, "We don't allow displays that intimidate others. Your uniform sends the wrong message. This is a family neighborhood." I felt heat rise in my chest. Wrong message? I wore this to protect families. I wore this so neighborhoods like this could exist, but I didn't speak. Silence can cut sharper than words. She tapped her clipboard. "If you don't comply, we'll increase the fines. And if necessary, take legal action." Legal action over cloth and metals. I looked past her. Mrs. Reynolds, the widow 2 houses down, was standing by her mailbox. Her husband had served too. She gave me a small nod, barely noticeable, but I saw it, and it steadied me for the rest of that week. Letters piled up, one fine after another, $200, $500, $1,000. Each written like I was a criminal, each word meant to break me down. But they didn't know something. They didn't know I had lived under worse pressure. I had been yelled at by drill sergeants louder than any HOA meeting. I had been threatened by men who carried guns, not clipboards, and the more they pushed, the calmer I became. One night, I walked outside and sat on the porch in my uniform. I didn't care anymore. If they wanted a fight, they would get one, but not the kind they expected, because I wasn't alone. I still had brothers, men who understood loyalty. And who understood what it meant when someone tried to erase your honor. And when I made the call, they answered without hesitation. The next weekend, the cul-de-sac changed forever. That Saturday morning, the sun rose quiet over the cul-de-sac, but the silence didn't last because I wasn't alone anymore. I stood at the edge of my driveway in full uniform, and then, one by one, my brothers arrived. Trucks pulled up. Doors slammed, men in pressed uniforms stepped out, metals glinting in the light. Some had scars, some had shadows in their eyes, but all of them carried the same thing. Respect. The neighbors froze. Kids dropped their bikes. Dogs barked and then fell silent. It was like the whole street held its breath. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We just stood shoulder to shoulder, lined up across the sidewalk. And that's when Ms. Carter appeared. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she marched toward us. Her clipboard was clutched so tight, her knuckles turned white. She stopped a few feet away, her face red with fury. "Daniel, what is this circus?" she snapped. "This is a neighborhood, not a parade ground." I looked at her calm, steady. "This is respect," I said. "Respect you don't get to take away." Her mouth twisted. She waved her clipboard like a weapon. "You're all in violation, every single one of you. This isn't allowed. This is harassment." Harassment. That word hung in the air. I thought of the letters taped to my door, the threats, the fines, and I almost laughed. One of my brothers stepped forward, tall, broad shoulders, eyes like steel. He said nothing. He just stood there, silent. And that silence was louder than her shouting. The crowd had grown now. Dozens of neighbors lined the street. Some whispered. Some recorded on their phones. And for the first time, I saw doubt flicker in her eyes. Still, she wouldn't stop. She shouted about lawsuits, about rules, about how we were ruining the peace of the community. Her voice cracked, sharp, desperate. But then something shifted. A sound broke through to attention, clapping, slow at first, then louder. It came from Mrs. Reynolds, the widow. She clapped with tears in her eyes, and then another neighbor joined, and another. Soon the whole street was clapping, cheering, not for her, for us. Ms. Carter froze, her face drained of color. Her power was slipping right there in front of everyone. I took a step closer, not threatening, just firm. "You wanted me to strip my uniform," I said softly. "But today, this street sees who really deserves respect." She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For once, the Queen of Rules had no words. My brothers and I stood there as the clapping grew louder. Children waved. Even the men who never spoke at HOA meetings nodded with pride. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't about one man or one uniform. This was about every neighbor who had been pushed, fined, bullied into silence. The board could write rules, but they couldn't write respect, and they couldn't erase what we stood for. Ms. Carter turned sharply, heels digging into the pavement. She stormed back toward her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. And just like that, the neighborhood had chosen sides. That night, I sat on my porch in uniform, letters still piled up on my kitchen counter. Fines still threatened me, but for the first time, I didn't feel alone, because now, the neighborhood had seen the truth. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house felt louder. Every shadow felt longer. I knew Ms. Carter wouldn't just walk away. Power doesn't give up easy. It claws back, even harder by morning. The proof was waiting on my porch. Another letter, thicker this time. Inside was a notice of imminent legal action. They were threatening to take me to court over a uniform. I sat at the table, letter in hand, coffee going cold, the words blurred. But the message was clear. I wanted to break me. They wanted to make me the example that scared everyone else into silence. But I wasn't the only one who read it. My brothers were still in town. They gathered in my living room that morning, boots lined by the door, coffee mugs scattered on the counter. We didn't talk about war stories this time. We talked about the neighborhood. We talked about justice. And that's when the plan was born. We didn't fight back with weapons. We fought back with compliance. Every single one of us read the HOA handbook cover to cover. Every line, every absurd little rule, every loophole they thought no one would notice. And then, we followed them. To the letter. That week, the cul-de-sac turned into a battlefield of petty rules. One neighbor mowed his lawn exactly to the HOA's approved length, measured with a ruler. Every morning at 7 a.m., another painted his mailbox the community-approved beige, then repainted it daily. Just a slightly different shade each time. All still legal. I parked my car exactly within the HOA's distance from the curb, measured down to the inch. We even bought garbage cans that matched every size and color requirement, but lined them up in patterns that spelled words from above. Neighbors started laughing, shaking their heads, joining in. The rules that once felt like chains turned into weapons against the very people who wrote them. By Friday, the board was overwhelmed. Complaints poured in, but every complaint was within the rules. They couldn't fine us. They couldn't stop us. They had trapped themselves in their own cage, and Ms. Carter, she was furious. At the next HOA meeting, she slammed her gavel so hard it cracked the wood. Her voice echoed through the hall as she shouted about mockery and disrespect. But when she looked at the rows of neighbors behind me, she saw it, smiles, nods. Quiet rebellion, for the first time. She was outnumbered, but power doesn't collapse in one night. It claws, it scratches, it tries to drag you down with it. The very next day, a letter came from a law firm downtown. They wanted me in court, not just for fines, but for disturbing the peace and organizing harassment. I stared at the letter, and for a moment, the weight of it sank into me. Court meant money, time, stress. Court meant they were trying to bleed me dry. But I wasn't fighting alone anymore, the day of the hearing. I walked into the courthouse in uniform, not because I had to, because I chose to, and I wasn't alone. Half the neighborhood followed. Mrs. Reynolds in her Sunday best, parents with kids in tow, my brothers lined up like a wall. When the judge read the charges, the room felt heavy. But then, evidence started rolling in. Videos from neighbors showing Ms. Carter screaming, threatening, banging on doors. Photos of absurd violation letters. Even old records showing fines that made no sense. The judge's face hardened. And then, he said the words I'll never forget. This is harassment. This HOA has abused its power. The room erupted in whispers. I looked at Ms. Carter, her face pale, her mouth open like she'd been slapped. Her clipboard couldn't save her now. The court dismissed the case. The HOA was ordered to stop its harassment and refund thousands of dollars in unfair fines. It wasn't just my win. It was everyone's win. When we left the courthouse, the sun was blinding. People clapped as we stepped onto the steps. I felt the weight lift from my chest. For once, justice felt real. But Ms. Carter didn't stop completely. She avoided me for weeks. No more letters. No more glares on my lawn. But sometimes, I'd see her car slow down near my house. Sometimes I'd hear whispers that she was plotting a comeback. Power never disappears. It just hides, waiting. One night I sat on my porch again. Uniform pressed, metals catching the moonlight. The air was cool, quiet, peaceful, and I thought about everything that had happened. Ed, the fines, the threats, the courtroom, and the neighbors who had finally found their voice. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who had been bullied into silence by people who thought a title gave them power. It was about standing up, even when it's easier to sit down. I looked at the street, at the kids riding bikes, at the old man watering his lawn, and I realized something. This neighborhood would never be the same again, because once people taste freedom, they don't forget the flavor. The HOA still existed, still sent newsletters, still pretended to hold control, but everyone knew the truth now. The power didn't belong to the board, it belonged to the people. The days after the court hearing felt strange. The neighborhood was quieter, almost too quiet. No letters taped to doors, no fines in mailboxes, no angry knocks in the night. But silence can be dangerous. Silence means someone is waiting, watching, planning. I tried to enjoy the calm. I cut my grass. I waved at neighbors. I sat on my porch in the evenings with a glass of sweet tea. But I could feel eyes on me, from behind blinds, from cars that slowed down when they passed, and I knew exactly whose eyes they were. Ms. Carter had lost in court, but people like her don't accept defeat. They plot, they dig, they wait for weakness. One evening, just as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the street, I heard a knock on my door, not loud, not angry, almost polite. I opened it to find a man in a dark suit holding a folder. "Mr. Daniel," he said, "I represent the HOA insurance company. We're conducting an internal review." His voice was smooth, rehearsed, like he'd said the same line 100 times. He handed me a paper. It wasn't a fine. It was a demand for damages. They wanted money for embarrassment caused to the board during the incident. I read it twice, then looked at him. "You mean embarrassment because they lost?" I asked. He didn't answer. He just adjusted his tie and said, "You'll hear from us again." And just like that, the war was back. I called my lawyer. She laughed when she read the paper. "This is nonsense," she said. "They're trying to intimidate you." But she also warned me. They'll keep coming, until they break. That night I couldn't rest. I walked the neighborhood in the dark, hands in my pockets, eyes scanning every house. And as I passed each home, I thought about the people inside, the single mom who worked double shifts, the retired couple on a fixed income, the young family who painted their shutters the wrong shade of blue and nearly lost their savings to fines. I realized this fight wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. So I called a meeting, not an HOA meeting, a real meeting. At my house, no gavels, no clipboards, just neighbors. The living room filled fast. People brought folding chairs. Kids sat on the floor. The air buzzed with energy. And for the first time, I saw hope in their faces. They spoke about years of abuse, about being fined for holiday decorations, for leaving bikes on driveways, for planting flowers that weren't community standard. Some cried, some shouted, but all agreed on one thing. Enough was enough, and that's when someone said it. Why don't we remove them? Why don't we take the board back? The words hung heavy in the air. Could we? Was it possible? By law, yes. Every HOA board is elected by the homeowners, and elections can be overturned if enough people demand it. The room erupted with whispers, plans, excitement. And in that moment, the fear that had ruled this neighborhood for years started to crack. We didn't just want respect anymore, we wanted change. The following weeks were chaos. We knocked on doors. We passed out flyers. We spoke to every neighbor we could, and slowly, one by one, people joined. Some were scared at first. What if they fine us more? They asked. But when they saw the numbers growing, they stood taller. Courage spreads like fire. By the time the next HOA election came, the board didn't know what hit them. The community hall was packed. Normally, maybe 20 people showed up. That night, it was standing room only. Ms. Carter sat at the front table, her usual smug smile plastered on her face, but her eyes darted nervously across the crowd. She could feel the shift. Power was slipping, and she knew it. The vote began. Hands rose in waves, names written on slips of paper, boxes filled to the brim. When the final count was read, the room exploded. The old board was gone. Every single one of them, replaced by neighbors who had been silenced for too long. Ms. Carter stormed out, clipboard clutched like a shield, her heels clicking fast across the floor. But this time, nobody followed her. I stood at the back of the hall, uniform jacket over my chair, and watched history unfold in the smallest of places. It wasn't a battlefield, it wasn't a city, it was a cul-de-sac in Texas. But victory is victory. No matter where it happens, the weeks that followed felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. Fines disappeared, letters stopped, rules were rewritten with common sense. Neighbors laughed more, smiled more, talked more. Kids played in the street without fear of notes left on their parents' doors. Christmas lights sparkled again. Every house different, every house alive. For the first time in years, this neighborhood felt like a home, not a prison. But late at night, when the street was quiet, I'd catch myself wondering, where did Ms. Carter go? What was she planning? Because people like her don't vanish. They wait. They hide. They burn with anger until they find a way back. The neighborhood felt free, but freedom is fragile. Weeks passed with laughter in the streets, music on porches, even barbecue smoke drifting through the cul-de-sac again. People smiled at each other in ways I hadn't seen before. It was like we had broken chains we didn't even and realize we were wearing. But behind every smile, I felt a shadow. The shadow of Ms. Carter. She had vanished from meetings. Her house sat dark most evenings. But I knew she was still here, somewhere, watching. And when people like her disappear, it's never the end. It's the calm before another storm. One morning, I walked outside to find something taped to my door again. For a second, my stomach twisted, expecting another violation, but it wasn't. It was a flyer across the top. Bold letters read, "Protect our community, say no to disorder." And right below was a picture of me in my uniform. I stood there staring at it, my jaw tightening. This wasn't just a message, this was an attack. She was back. And this time she was going after my reputation. That night I called a small gathering at my place. Neighbors crowded in, flyers in hand, anger on their faces. Some were scared. "What if she's rallying people against us?" one asked. Another said, "She'll never stop until you're gone, Daniel." But then Mrs. Reynolds spoke. Her voice was steady, quiet, but sharp. She can put his face on a flyer, but she can't erase what he's done. She's losing. That's why she's desperate. Her words calmed the room, but inside, I wasn't calm, because desperation can be dangerous. Days later, rumors spread. Some said Ms. Carter was forming a new committee outside the official HOA. Others whispered she was filing complaints with county officials, trying to drag us back into court. And one evening, as I took out the trash, I saw her car parked at the corner, engine off, headlights dimmed, just sitting there. When I stepped closer, the car sped away. She was watching me again. The next week things escalated. Mailboxes knocked over in the night. Trash cans tipped and scattered across lawns. Even graffiti on the community park wall. Respect the rules or leave. It wasn't right. Andom, it was planned. It was her. I went door to door the next day. I spoke with every neighbor I could, and the more I listened, the more I realized fear was creeping back in. Some neighbors whispered they wanted to avoid trouble. Others said maybe we should just let her back on the board. The thought made my blood boil. We had fought so hard, and now fear was taking root again. I couldn't let that happen, so I decided to confront her. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth. I walked up to her house on a Saturday afternoon. The blinds were drawn, the lawn uncut, the once proud garden choked with weeds. I knocked. At first silence, then the door opened a crack. Her eyes peered out, cold as stone. "What do you want, Daniel?" she hissed. "You lost," I said. "It's over. You can't keep tearing this neighborhood apart." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think you won? This place is chaos without me. Rules keep people safe. Rules keep order. Without me, you're nothing." I shook my head. "No, without you, we're free." Her eyes narrowed. The crack in the door slammed shut, but even through the wood, I heard her voice. "This isn't over." And I believed her. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside pulled me from bed. A car door slamming, a dog barking, the rustle of leaves in the wind. I sat on my porch until dawn. Uniform jacket across my shoulders, waiting. The days that followed felt tense. Neighbors still smiled, but their voices were lower, their steps quicker. She was working in the shadows, spreading fear. I knew if we didn't act soon, the neighborhood would split again. So I called for a gathering at the community park. Everyone came, families, kids, old couples who never left their houses before. The park buzzed with nervous energy, and when I stepped onto the small wooden stage, the crowd fell silent. I looked at them, their tired faces, their hopeful eyes, and I spoke from the heart. We've lived under fear long enough. We've paid for mailboxes, for paint, for lawns that were never good enough. But this isn't about grass or fences anymore. This is about respect, about freedom, about our right to live without being watched and threatened every day. Ms. Carter thinks she owns this street, but she doesn't. We do. And if she comes back, she won't face me alone. She'll face all of us. The crowd erupted. Cheers echoed through the park. For the first time, I felt the fear lifting again. But the very next day, retaliation came. Someone had slashed the tires on my truck. Deep cuts. Rubber torn like paper. A note left under the windshield wiper. "Leave while you can." I stood there staring at it, fists clenched. This wasn't just about fines anymore. This was war. I replaced the tires and drove that same truck right to the next neighborhood event. I wanted her to see she hadn't scared me. I wanted her to see I wasn't leaving. And as I parked, neighbors surrounded me. Some patted my back, some offered to pay for the damage. But what struck me most was their eyes. Not scared anymore, angry. That anger spread. We set up neighborhood watches. We took turns walking the streets at night. We put cameras on porches, lights on driveways. The community she once controlled was now united against her. And yet, the sightings continued. Her car parked in shadows, her figure moving between houses at night, the sound of her voice carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. She was haunting us. She was waiting for a chance to strike one evening. As the sun bled into the horizon, I stood on my porch again, uniform jacket on, coffee in hand, and I thought about everything we had gone through, the fines, the letters, the courtroom, the election, the threats, and I realized this wasn't just a story about an HOA. It was about power, about how far people will go to keep it, and about what it takes to finally break it. The night deepened. Stars appeared, and somewhere in the darkness, I swore I saw her watching, her eyes glowing with the last spark of a fight she couldn't win, but the question lingered in my mind, and maybe in yours too. The weeks dragged on like heavy chains. Every day felt normal on the surface. Kids laughed, sprinklers hissed, the smell of barbecue floated in the air. But beneath that calm, there was tension, a quiet dread. Everyone felt it. Everyone knew she wasn't done. Ms. Carter had lost her title, her seat, her power. But losing power doesn't kill hunger. It makes it sharper. The flyers kept appearing, slipped under doors, pinned to trees, even taped to the playground, each one dripping with lies about me, calling me a troublemaker, a fraud, a danger to the neighborhood. Some neighbors tore them down, others ignored them. But a few, a quiet few, began to believe them. That was her game now. Divide us, break us from within. One evening, I sat on my porch as the sun dipped low. A soft breeze carried voices across the street. Two neighbors whispered by the mailbox. They didn't see me listening. One said, "Maybe she was right. Maybe he's bringing too much trouble here." The other nodded slowly, and my chest tightened. I had fought for these people. I had stood in court for them. I had bled for them in places they would never see. And now, doubt was seeping back like poison. That night I didn't sleep. I walked the street under the pale moonlight. Every house stood silent, blinds drawn, porch lights glowing, and in the shadows, I thought I saw her. Watching, waiting. The next morning, it got worse. A letter came from the county office. Not HOA this time. An official complaint filed against me personally. Noise violations, disturbing the peace, even threatening behavior. The signature at the bottom was anonymous, but I didn't need a name. I knew who had done it. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was personal. I showed the letter to my neighbors. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others clenched their fists. Mrs. Reynolds whispered, "She's trying to ruin you, Daniel, piece by piece." And maybe she was, but I wasn't going to let her. We decided to fight back with the only weapon we had left: truth. We gathered evidence. Videos of her vandalizing mailboxes in the night. Recordings of her voice yelling through doors. Testimonies from neighbors she had fined into poverty. Even old emails she had sent by mistake to the wrong recipients. Filled with insults and threats, piece by piece. The puzzle came together, and when we had enough, we went public. We didn't hide in meetings this time. We hosted a community gathering at the park again, but bigger, louder. Families came with chairs. Reporters even showed up, cameras flashing, and under the hot Texas sun, I stood on that stage with every scrap of evidence spread across a table. "This is the truth," I said. "This is what's been haunting our neighborhood. It's not rules. It's not order. It's fear. And we all know where it comes from." Gasps filled the air as photos and videos played. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some neighbors covered their mouths in shock. Others shouted in anger. And that's when it happened. A figure at the back of the crowd stood up. Ms. Carter. Her face pale, but her eyes burning with fire. She pushed forward, her voice sharp as glass. "Lies, all of it. He's twisting everything. I protected this community. Without me, you're weak." The crowd roared back, shouts, boos, accusations. For the first time, she wasn't feared. She was hated. I met her eyes, calm, steady. "No," I said softly. "You weren't protecting us. You were controlling us." She froze. The weight of the crowd pressed in on her, and in that moment, her power crumbled. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked, hands trembled, her face twisted, and then she stormed away, fast steps through the grass, disappearing into the parking lot. The sound of her car engine faded into the distance, and just like that, she was gone. The park fell silent for a moment, then erupted into cheers. Neighbors hugged each other. Kids laughed. People clapped until their hands turned red. It wasn't just relief, it was freedom, real freedom. That night, the cul-de-sac felt lighter, porch lights glowed brighter, music played louder, People toasted drinks in driveways and shared food across fences. It felt like the neighborhood had finally been reborn. But inside me, something stirred, a question I couldn't shake. Was she truly gone? Or just waiting, somewhere in the shadows, waiting for a chance to strike again? Because I knew her kind, power-hungry, relentless, addicted to control, and people like that don't disappear quietly. They linger, like ghosts. I sat on my porch in uniform once more. The metals gleamed under the streetlight. My truck tires hummed fresh from the road, and I thought about everything we had faced. The fines, the threats, the court, the sabotage, the fear, and now, the victory. I looked down the street, children playing tag in the night air, families sitting together, neighbors who once avoided each other now laughing like old friends. The street felt alive again, but deep in the silence between their laughter, I swore I could still hear it. The faint clicking of heels on pavement, the ghost of a clipboard snapping shut. She was gone. But her shadow would always remain. The days after that gathering felt different. It was like the air itself had shifted. Neighbors walked taller, the cul-de-sac felt brighter, even the grass seemed greener. Or maybe that was just how freedom looked when fear was gone. We had beaten her, or at least we thought we had. Weeks rolled into months. No more flyers, no more notes taped to doors, no more whispers in the dark. It was quiet again, almost too quiet. And in that quiet, I started to live like a man who had been carrying weight for too long. I fixed my fence. I helped Mrs. Reynolds plant flowers along her walkway. I joined cookouts and listened to children's laughter without flinching every time a car slowed down on the street. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, but peace is fragile, and shadows don't vanish so easily. One evening, as the summer heat faded and fireflies blinked across the yards, I found another envelope on my porch. Plain white, no stamp, no address. Inside was a single sentence written in red ink. "Did you really think it was over?" My chest tightened. The paper crumpled in my fist as I looked up and down the street. Nobody there, but I could feel her presence. Ms. Carter was still out there. I didn't tell the neighbors right away. Why scare them when the joy was finally returning? But deep down, I knew. This fight wasn't finished. Over the next weeks, small things started happening. Not explosions of drama like before, subtle things. Trash cans pushed into the street at night, stray dogs let loose through the cul-de-sac, weeds suddenly showing up in gardens that had been spotless the day before. It felt like someone was testing us, poking us, trying to make us snap. Then came the break. One morning the playground was destroyed, slides bent, swings cut, graffiti splattered across the walls in angry red letters. Rules bring order. I stood there with the other parents as children cried. Their safe place was gone, and I knew. This wasn't just vandalism, it was a message. The neighbors looked to me, eyes wide with fear and anger. "What do we do now, Daniel?" they asked. My heart pounded as I looked at the wreckage. I wanted to scream, to chase shadows, to fight fire with fire. But instead, I took a breath, and I spoke. We rebuild. And we did. The very next day, the entire neighborhood showed up. Hammers, nails, paint. Children carried small buckets of sand. Old men lifted beams on their shoulders. The air rang with laughter and determination. By sundown, the playground stood tall again, stronger, brighter, alive. And for every piece we fixed, we erased a little more of her shadow. But I knew she wasn't done. Not yet. 2 nights later, I saw her. For the first time in months, she was standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac, half hidden in the glow of a streetlight, her figure thin, her posture rigid, a clipboard still clutched in her hand like it was part of her body. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched. I stepped forward, slowly, heart pounding. When I reached the streetlight, she turned, her face pale, her eyes hollow, but still burning with that same hunger. "You think you've won," she whispered. "This place is chaos without me. You'll beg for my rules when it all falls apart." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, I didn't see a tyrant. I saw a broken woman, a woman so addicted to power that losing it had left her empty. I wanted to shout at her. I wanted to remind her of every fine, every threat, every cruel word. But instead, I stayed quiet, because nothing I said would matter. Her war wasn't with me, it was with herself. She backed away, step by step, until the shadows swallowed her, and then she was gone. That night I sat on my porch, uniform jacket draped across my chair. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. Laughter echoed from porches. Life went on, but I knew, somewhere out there, she was still watching. Days turned into weeks again. No more sightings, no more letters, just silence. Maybe she had finally accepted her defeat. Maybe she had left town altogether. Or maybe she was just waiting for another opening. I'll never know for sure, but here's what I do know. This neighborhood is stronger now. We found our voices. We learned that rules don't make a community. People do. We learned that fear only has power when you give it space, and when you stand together. Even the loudest tyrant becomes just a whisper in the wind, sometime. Mess, I still wear my uniform on the porch at night, not as defiance, not as rebellion, but as a reminder of where I've been, a reminder of what we fought for, and a reminder that respect, real respect, can't be taken away by anyone with a clipboard. The kids laugh in the street, families share dinners on driveways, and even when shadows creep at the edges of my thoughts, I look at this cul-de-sac, and I know we won, not because we silenced her, but because we found each other. Maybe she's still out there. Maybe she's planning. Maybe one day her shadow will fall across this street again. But if that day comes, she won't face just me. She'll face an entire neighborhood that refuses to bow again. And that's the real victory. But let me ask you this. If the person who tormented you vanished into the night after losing everything, would you finally let your guard down? Or would you always keep one eye on the shadows, waiting for their return?